My father-in-law laughed so hard at Christmas dinner when I mentioned my promotion that he nearly choked on his turkey. He wiped tears from his eyes and told the entire table that playing with computers wasn't a real job for grown-ups. 3 days later, his new boss was calling me ma'am and asking for my professional advice on a $1 million digital transformation project. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of cinnamon and pine filled the Chen family home in Portland's Hawthorne district, where 3 generations had gathered for what would become the most memorable Christmas Eve dinner in family history. The Victorian house, with its original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures, had witnessed decades of holiday celebrations, but none quite like this one. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my mother-in-law Linda bustling between the stove and counter, her movements practiced and efficient as she prepared the feast that had become legendary among the extended Chen family. Steam rose from pots of traditional dishes alongside American holiday classics, creating a fusion that perfectly represented our multicultural gathering. Maya Rodriguez Chen. That's me, though most people just called me Maya. At 32, I had spent the better part of the last decade building what I considered a successful career in user experience design, climbing from junior designer to senior UX lead at Innovate Tech Solutions, one of Portland's fastest-growing tech companies. My work involved creating digital experiences that millions of people interacted with daily, though I had long since stopped trying to explain the intricacies of my profession to certain members of my husband's family. David appeared beside me, adjusting his sweater and running a hand through his dark hair. My husband of 4 years had always been the peacekeeper in his family, the middle child who smoothed over conflicts and redirected conversations away from potentially explosive topics. Tonight, however, there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested he sensed the undercurrents of what was to come. "Your dad seems particularly animated tonight," I observed quietly, watching Robert Chen through the archway that separated the kitchen from the dining room. My father-in-law was holding court at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically as he recounted some workplace story to his captive audience. David sighed softly. He's been talking all week about the changes happening at Pacific Manufacturing. Apparently, they've brought in some new executive to modernize their operations, and he's not thrilled about it. Robert Chen was a man of strong opinions and stronger convictions, particularly when it came to what he considered real work. At 58, he had spent his entire career in traditional manufacturing, working his way up from floor supervisor to operations manager at Pacific Manufacturing Corp., a mid-sized company that produced industrial components for various sectors. His worldview was firmly rooted in tangible products, measurable outputs, and hierarchies that had remained largely unchanged for decades. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very skills he dismissed in my profession were increasingly essential to companies like his, but pointing out such contradictions had never been well received in past family gatherings. I had learned to navigate these dinners by focusing on safer topics, asking about his golf game, or letting him regale us with stories from his college football days. Nicole bounded into the kitchen, her energy infectious as always. David's younger sister had inherited her father's confidence, but channeled it into her career as a pediatric nurse, a profession that earned universal family approval and frequent praise from Robert. Behind her followed Marcus, the eldest Chen sibling, whose position as a high school principal made him another family favorite in his father's eyes. "Maya, I heard you got some kind of promotion at work," Nicole said, genuinely interested. "That's amazing. What exactly do you do there again? I know it's something with technology, but I've never really understood the details." The question was innocent enough, but I caught David's subtle wince. We had discussed this exact scenario during the drive over, both of us aware that my recent promotion to senior UX lead had come with responsibilities and recognition that would inevitably come up in conversation. The raise had been substantial, bringing my salary significantly higher than what most people in the room earned, but discussing compensation had always been a delicate matter in the Chen household. "I work in user experience design," I explained, keeping my tone casual and approachable. "Essentially, I help create digital products and services that are intuitive and easy for people to use. When you open an app on your phone or visit a website, someone like me has thought through every interaction you might have with it." Linda paused in her food preparation, turning to face us with genuine curiosity. "That sounds fascinating, dear. I imagine that requires quite a bit of skill and training." "It does," I replied, appreciating her interest. "I have a master's degree in human-computer interaction, and I'm constantly staying updated on new technologies and user research methodologies. The field evolves rapidly, so continuous learning is essential." Robert's voice carried from the dining room, growing louder as he apparently concluded his story to general laughter from the assembled family members. The sound drew our attention, and I noticed David's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. His relationship with his father had always been complex, marked by mutual respect, but also fundamental differences in their approaches to life and work. "We should probably join everyone else," David suggested, though his reluctance was evident. "Mom, do you need help bringing anything to the table?" Linda waved us toward the dining room, her arms full of serving dishes. "Go ahead, I'll be right behind you with the last of the sides." The Chen family dining room was a testament to Linda's decorating skills and attention to tradition. The long mahogany table could comfortably seat 12, though tonight we were only 8. Candles flickered between carefully arranged holiday centerpieces, and the good china reflected the warm glow of the overhead chandelier. Each place setting was perfectly arranged, complete with multiple forks and glasses that suggested Linda had spared no effort in making this evening special. Robert occupied his customary position at the head of the table, his presence commanding, even in casual conversation. At 58, he maintained the broad shoulders and confident posture of someone accustomed to being in charge, whether on the factory floor or in family gatherings. His graying hair was meticulously styled, and his holiday sweater was pressed to perfection, projecting an image of success and authority that he cultivated in all aspects of his life. "Maya, David, come sit down," he called out as we entered the room. "I was just telling everyone about the chaos at work these days. They've brought in this new hotshot from Silicon Valley, who thinks she can revolutionize manufacturing with a bunch of computer programs and digital nonsense." The contempt in his voice when he said digital nonsense made David shift uncomfortably beside me, but I maintained my composure, taking my assigned seat with a polite smile. This wasn't the first time Robert had expressed skepticism about technology-driven solutions, and I had long since learned that engaging in debates during family dinners rarely ended well for anyone involved. James Hawthorne, Robert's longtime colleague and family friend, nodded in agreement from across the table. "It's the same everywhere, Rob. These young executives come in with their fancy degrees and big ideas, thinking they can fix everything with computers. Half the time, they don't understand the actual work being done." Marcus leaned forward, genuinely curious about his father's workplace drama. "What kind of changes is she trying to implement?" Robert's expression darkened as he launched into a detailed critique of the new initiatives being proposed at Pacific Manufacturing. "Everything has to be digital now. Digital workflows, digital inventory management, digital customer interfaces. She wants to completely overhaul systems that have worked perfectly fine for decades, all in the name of efficiency and modernization." He gestured dismissively, his frustration evident in every movement. The woman has never worked a day on an actual production floor, never had to manage real workers doing real jobs. But somehow, she's supposed to know better than people who've been in this industry for their entire careers. I found myself listening with professional interest despite the underlying criticism of my field. The challenges Robert was describing were exactly the kind of complex organizational problems that user experience designers were trained to address. Digital transformation wasn't about replacing human expertise, but rather about creating tools and systems that amplified existing capabilities while eliminating inefficiencies and communication barriers. Linda appeared with the final dishes, and we began the familiar ritual of passing plates and serving portions. The conversation naturally shifted to lighter topics as everyone focused on the impressive spread before us. Traditional roasted turkey anchored the meal, surrounded by stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and cranberry sauce, alongside Linda's famous dumplings and stir-fried vegetables that honored the family's heritage. "So, Maya, Marcus," said between bites, "Nicole mentioned you got promoted recently. Congratulations! What does your new position involve?" The question was friendly and seemed genuinely interested, but I noticed Robert's attention shift toward our conversation, his expression already showing the familiar skepticism that appeared whenever my career became the topic of discussion. David reached for my hand under the table, a small gesture of support that I appreciated more than he probably realized. "Thank you, Marcus. I was promoted to Senior UX Lead, which means I'm now overseeing the user experience strategy for multiple product lines at InnovateTech. I manage a team of designers and researchers, and I work directly with executives to ensure our digital products meet both user needs and business objectives." Robert set down his fork with a slight clink against his plate. "UX Lead," he repeated, his tone carrying that familiar note of dismissive amusement. "User experience strategy. I have to admit, Maya, I still don't understand what any of that actually means in practical terms." The statement hung in the air for a moment, and I could feel the subtle shift in atmosphere as family members registered the underlying challenge in his words. This was familiar territory, the intersection where Robert's traditional worldview collided with the realities of modern professional life that he seemed determined not to understand. It means I help companies create products that people actually want to use, I explained patiently, keeping my voice level and educational rather than defensive. When you interact with any digital service, whether it's your bank's website or the app you use to check the weather, someone has designed that experience to be as intuitive and helpful as possible. Robert chuckled, shaking his head in that way that immediately signaled his skepticism. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But what do you actually produce? I mean, in manufacturing, we create tangible products that serve real purposes. We make components that go into machines, equipment that helps build infrastructure, items that people can touch and use in the physical world. His voice gained momentum as he warmed to his theme, clearly pleased to have an opportunity to expound on his philosophy of meaningful work. When I leave the office each day, I can point to specific things that exist because of what we did. Products that will last for decades, maybe longer. That's real contribution to society. The implication was clear, though he hadn't yet stated it directly. My work, in his view, was somehow less substantial, less meaningful, less real than what he considered legitimate professional achievement. I had encountered this attitude before, not just from Robert, but from others who struggled to understand how digital experiences translated into tangible value. David cleared his throat softly, recognizing the dangerous direction of the conversation. "Dad, Maya's work is incredibly important. The digital products she creates are used by millions of people every day. That's hardly insignificant." Robert waved his hand dismissively, his expression showing that he found this defense unconvincing. "I'm not saying it's insignificant, David. I'm just questioning whether it's real work in the traditional sense. Sitting at a computer, moving things around on a screen, having meetings about user experiences, whatever that means. It seems more like playing than actual professional responsibility." The word playing hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to maintain my external composure. This wasn't just professional dismissal anymore. It was personal invalidation of everything I had worked to achieve. The years of education, the complex projects I had led, The measurable improvements I had delivered to both user satisfaction and business metrics, all reduced to playing in Robert's assessment. Nicole looked uncomfortable, glancing between her father and me as she clearly sensed the tension escalating. Marcus focused intently on his food, apparently hoping the conversation would move in a different direction. Linda continued serving, but I noticed her movements had become more careful, more deliberate, as if she too recognized that we were approaching dangerous conversational territory. I think there might be some misunderstanding about what modern technology work involves, I said carefully, choosing my words with diplomatic precision. The projects I lead often have budgets in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. The decisions I make directly impact company revenue, user satisfaction scores, and market competitiveness. Robert's eyes lit up with what I initially mistook for interest but quickly recognized as the gleam of someone preparing to make their decisive argument. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for what, exactly? Moving buttons around on screens? Creating prettier colors for websites? Having endless meetings about whether something should be blue or green? His voice was gaining volume and confidence, feeding off what he perceived as the absurdity of my explanations. James Hoffman nodded along approvingly, clearly enjoying Robert's critique of modern workplace trends. Even Marcus looked up from his plate, caught between curiosity about the debate and obvious discomfort with its personal nature. Last month, I continued, determined to provide concrete examples despite Robert's increasingly dismissive tone. I led a project that redesigned the checkout process for a major e-commerce platform. The improvements we implemented increased conversion rates by 18%, which translated to an additional $2.3 million in quarterly revenue. The numbers were impressive by any reasonable measure, representing the kind of measurable business impact that should have commanded respect regardless of the industry or methodology involved. But Robert's expression showed no sign of being impressed. If anything, he seemed even more convinced that what I was describing was somehow artificial or inflated. Conversion rates, he repeated with a laugh that had an edge to it. Revenue from making it easier for people to buy things online. Do you see what I mean? None of this creates anything real. You're just manipulating people into spending money more efficiently. The characterization stung because it revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of what user experience design actually accomplished. Improving conversion rates wasn't about manipulation. It was about reducing friction, eliminating confusion, and helping people accomplish their intended goals more easily. But explaining these nuances to someone who had already decided that digital work was inherently less valuable seemed increasingly futile. David's grip on my hand tightened under the table, and I could see the frustration building in his expression as he watched his father dismiss his wife's professional achievements with such casual contempt. The family dinner that was supposed to be about celebration and togetherness was rapidly deteriorating into a confrontation that would be difficult to recover from. "Dad?" David said, his voice carrying a warning tone that suggested his patience was wearing thin. Maya has won multiple industry awards for her work. She's recognized as one of the leading UX designers in the Pacific Northwest. Her expertise is highly valued by her company and by clients across different industries. Robert seemed to interpret David's defense as further evidence of how thoroughly everyone had been convinced by what he saw as elaborate professional theater. "Industry awards for computer work," he said with a chuckle that seemed designed to provoke. "I'm sure there are awards for everything these days. Participation trophies for adults who want to feel important about their hobbies." The word hobbies was the final straw, the moment when Robert's dismissiveness crossed from professional skepticism into personal insult. My career, which I had spent years building through education, experience, and measurable achievement, was being reduced to a hobby by someone who had never taken the time to understand what it actually involved. Marcus finally looked up, his discomfort obvious as he attempted to redirect the conversation. "Maybe we should talk about something else. This is supposed to be a celebration, after all." But Robert wasn't finished. He had found his rhythm and seemed determined to make his point conclusively. I'm not trying to be mean, Maya, he said with the tone of someone who believed he was offering helpful perspective. I just think it's important to maintain some perspective about what constitutes real professional achievement. Playing with computers might be fun and might even pay well these days, but let's not pretend it's the same as jobs that actually build things or provide essential services. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable now, and I could see that even Linda was beginning to look troubled by the direction her husband had taken the conversation. Nicole had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth as she watched the exchange with obvious dismay. James Hoffman decided to pile on, apparently emboldened by Robert's confident critique. "It's like what's happening at our company," he said with a knowing nod. "This new executive they brought in keeps talking about digital transformation and user-centered design, whatever that means. She acts like she's going to revolutionize everything, but I doubt she could last 5 minutes on an actual production floor." The irony was almost overwhelming. Here were two men from Pacific Manufacturing Corp. Dismissing the exact expertise that their company had apparently decided was essential enough to hire an executive specifically to implement. But pointing out this contradiction would only escalate the confrontation further, and I was beginning to realize that rational discussion wasn't what was happening here. Robert leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with the support from his colleague and apparently convinced that he had made his case effectively. "The truth is, Maya, people in traditional industries have been doing real work for generations without needing computers to tell them how to do their jobs. All this digital stuff is just the latest fad that will probably be replaced by something else in a few years." His statement revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of technological evolution and business transformation that I almost didn't know where to begin responding. But before I could formulate a reply, he continued with what would become the moment that changed everything. "I mean, playing around with websites and apps is fine as a side project, but calling it a career? Calling yourself a senior lead?" He laughed again, the sound carrying that particular combination of amusement and disdain that made it clear he found the entire concept ridiculous. "It's like someone calling themselves a professional video game player. Sure, you might make some money doing it, but let's not pretend it's a real job for grown-ups." The silence that followed was absolute and uncomfortable, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the distant sound of holiday music playing from Linda's kitchen radio. Every person at the table seemed to recognize that Robert had crossed a line, moving from professional skepticism into territory that was unmistakably personal and insulting. David's face was flushed with anger, his usual diplomatic approach clearly inadequate for the situation his father had created. Nicole looked mortified, her eyes moving between her father and me as if trying to calculate how much damage had been done to family relationships. Marcus studied his plate intently, probably wishing he could disappear entirely from the increasingly uncomfortable scene. Linda set down her serving spoon with unusual force, the sound sharp enough to draw everyone's attention. "Robert," she said quietly, her voice carrying a disappointment that somehow seemed more powerful than outright anger. That was unkind and unnecessary, but Robert appeared oblivious to the impact of his words, seemingly convinced that he had simply stated an obvious truth that everyone else was too polite to acknowledge. "I'm just being honest, Linda. Maya is a lovely person, and I'm sure she's very good at whatever it is she does with computers. But let's maintain some perspective about what actually constitutes meaningful professional achievement." The patronizing tone of his final statement hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle, leaving behind an acrid residue that would linger long after the immediate moment had passed. I found myself staring at my plate, not because I was ashamed of my career or accomplishments, but because I was calculating my response to a level of disrespect that I had never experienced so directly and publicly. What Robert didn't know, what none of them knew except David, was that earlier that week I had received a call that would transform not just my career trajectory, but potentially the entire dynamic of this conversation. Catherine Walsh, Chief Technology Officer at Pacific Manufacturing Corp., had reached out personally to discuss a consulting opportunity that could revolutionize their digital infrastructure and operational efficiency. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. The very company where Robert worked, the traditional manufacturing environment he held up as the gold standard of real work, was desperately seeking exactly the kind of digital transformation expertise he was dismissing as playing with computers. But I didn't mention this during the dinner. Instead, I smiled politely, thanked Linda for the wonderful meal, and excused myself to help with dessert preparation. Because sometimes the most powerful responses come not from immediate confrontation, but from patient demonstration of exactly how wrong someone's assumptions can be. What Robert Chen didn't realize as he laughed at his own jokes and accepted congratulations from James Hawthorne for putting digital work in its proper perspective was that in exactly 3 days, his new boss would be calling me ma'am and asking for my professional guidance on a project that would determine the future of his career. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about timing, and sometimes that timing is absolutely perfect. The kitchen became my sanctuary as I escaped the lingering tension from the dining room. Linda was already at the sink, her movements sharp and efficient as she began washing dishes with more force than necessary. The sound of running water and clinking plates provided a welcome buffer from the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the dinner table. "I need to apologize for my husband's behavior tonight," Linda said without looking up from the soapy water. Her voice carried a mixture of embarrassment and frustration that I had rarely heard from her before. "What he said about your work was completely inappropriate and frankly ignorant." Her directness surprised me. Throughout the years I had known Linda, she had always been diplomatic about family conflicts, preferring to smooth over disagreements rather than acknowledge them directly. But Robert's comments had apparently crossed a line even for someone as committed to family harmony as she was. "It's all right, Linda," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't really all right. "I've heard similar opinions before. Not everyone understands the technology industry." Linda turned to face me, her expression more serious than I had ever seen it. "That's not an excuse for dismissing something you've worked so hard to achieve. I may not understand all the technical details of what you do, but I know dedication when I see it. I know intelligence and skill when I encounter them." She dried her hands on a dish towel, her movements deliberate and thoughtful. "Robert has many wonderful qualities, but he's always struggled with change. New ideas, different approaches to work, anything that challenges his established understanding of how the world should operate. It's gotten worse as he's gotten older." The honesty in her assessment of her husband was both refreshing and slightly uncomfortable. I had always sensed that Linda saw things differently than Robert, but she had never articulated those differences so clearly before. Her willingness to acknowledge his limitations suggested that tonight's dinner had been a turning point for her as well. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face still flushed with anger from the confrontation at the table. I could see him struggling to find the right words, caught between loyalty to his father and support for his wife. The position wasn't enviable, and I felt a surge of sympathy for the impossible dynamics he was trying to navigate. "Maya, I'm so sorry," he began, his voice tight with emotion. What he said was completely out of line. I don't know what's gotten into him lately, but that behavior was unacceptable. Before I could respond, we heard Robert's voice from the dining room, apparently continuing his conversation with James Hawthorne about the challenges facing traditional industries in an increasingly digital world. His tone remained confident and dismissive, suggesting that he either didn't recognize the impact of his earlier comments or didn't particularly care about the offense he had caused. "He's been under a lot of stress at work," David continued, though his explanation sounded more like an attempt to convince himself than to excuse his father's behavior. "This new executive they brought in has been implementing changes that make him uncomfortable. I think he's taking out his frustrations on anything related to technology." Linda nodded, confirming David's assessment. The company has been going through significant restructuring over the past few months. Robert comes home every day complaining about new systems, different procedures, updated protocols. He feels like everything he's learned over 30 years is being dismissed as outdated. The irony of the situation was becoming increasingly clear. Robert's hostility toward my profession wasn't really about me or my specific achievements. It was about his own insecurity in the face of technological changes that he felt threatened by but couldn't control. My success in the very field that was disrupting his comfortable professional world made me a convenient target for anxieties that had nothing to do with my actual capabilities or contributions. Marcus joined us in the kitchen, carrying a stack of plates from the dining room. His expression was apologetic as he began helping with the cleanup process. I wanted to say something earlier, Maya, but I wasn't sure how to handle the situation without making things worse. You don't need to. Apologize for your father's opinions, Marcus, I assured him, though I appreciated his discomfort with what had transpired. Everyone is entitled to their perspective on different industries and career paths, but Nicole wasn't willing to let the matter rest so diplomatically. She burst into the kitchen with obvious frustration, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by indignation that made her look remarkably like her mother when she was angry. What Dad said tonight was ridiculous and embarrassing, she announced without preamble. I can't believe he actually called your career playing with computers. Does he have any idea how successful you are? How much your work actually matters to real people? Her passionate defense was touching, though I could see David and Marcus exchanging glances that suggested they were concerned about escalating family tensions further. But Nicole was clearly too upset to moderate her response for the sake of family harmony. I use the apps and websites Maya creates every single day, she continued, her voice gaining momentum. The hospital where I work relies on digital systems for everything from patient records to medication management. The idea that someone who designs those systems is just playing around is absolutely insane. Linda placed a calming hand on her daughter's shoulder. We all know your father was wrong, Nicole. Getting more upset about it won't help the situation. But Nicole wasn't finished. She had clearly been holding back her thoughts during dinner, and now they were pouring out in a rush of supportive indignation. Maya has a master's degree from a prestigious university. She leads projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She manages teams of other professionals. How is that different from what any other executive does? The question was rhetorical, but it highlighted the fundamental irrationality of Robert's position. If I had been managing manufacturing teams or overseeing traditional business operations, my achievements would have been immediately recognizable and respectable to him. The only difference was the industry and the tools involved, but that difference had been enough to trigger his dismissive response. As we continued cleaning up from dinner, the conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, though the underlying tension remained palpable. Everyone seemed to be making an effort to restore normalcy, but Robert's comments had created a rift that wouldn't be easily bridged by polite conversation and careful topic selection. Around 9 o'clock, James Hoffman finally took his leave, thanking Linda profusely for the wonderful meal and offering Robert one final opportunity to complain about the changes happening at Pacific Manufacturing. Their goodbyes were warm and mutually supportive, two traditional men finding comfort in their shared skepticism about modern workplace evolution. After James departed, the family began the gradual process of winding down from the evening. Marcus and Nicole gathered their coats and made their own preparations to leave, both of them making a point to hug me warmly and reiterate their support for my professional achievements. Their gestures were small but meaningful, family members choosing to align themselves with respect rather than dismissal. David and I helped Linda finish the final cleanup tasks, working together in companionable silence that felt restorative after the earlier conflict. The kitchen gradually returned to its normal state, with dishes put away and counters wiped clean, as if the evening's drama could be similarly organized and contained. Robert had retreated to his study, where we could hear him watching television, at higher volume than usual. His absence from the goodbye process was notable, suggesting that he was either still nursing his grievances or perhaps beginning to recognize that his comments had been poorly received by the rest of the family. As David and I prepared to leave, Linda walked us to the door with an expression that mixed maternal concern with something that looked almost like anticipation. She hugged us both warmly, but held me a moment longer than usual. "Maya," she said, quietly, "I have a feeling things are going to work out better than any of us expect." Sometimes people who underestimate others set themselves up for quite a surprise. Her comment struck me as oddly specific, almost as if she suspected something that the rest of us didn't know. But before I could ask what she meant, David was already starting the car, and we were backing out of the driveway, leaving the warmly lit house behind us as we drove through the quiet Portland streets. The ride home was initially silent, both of us processing the evening's events and trying to determine how much damage had been done to family relationships. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he struggled, with competing loyalties and frustrations. "I can't believe he said those things," David finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Calling your work playing around? Dismissing your achievements like they don't matter? I've never seen him be so deliberately insulting to anyone, especially a family member." I reached over and placed my hand on his arm, trying to provide some comfort for a situation that was clearly tearing him apart emotionally. "Your father feels threatened by changes he doesn't understand. It's not really about me personally, or even about my specific career. It's about his fear that the world is moving in directions he can't control or influence. But that's not an excuse for treating you that way," David insisted. "You've been nothing but respectful and supportive of him for years. You've listened to his stories, asked about his work, shown interest in his opinions, even when you probably disagreed with them. And this is how he repays that kindness." The hurt in David's voice revealed how deeply the evening had affected him. He was experiencing his own form of betrayal, watching his father treat his wife with a level of disrespect that challenged his fundamental understanding of family loyalty and basic courtesy. As we pulled into our driveway, I found myself thinking about the phone call I had received 3 days earlier. Catherine Walsh, Chief Technology Officer at Pacific Manufacturing Corp., had contacted me personally to discuss a potential consulting engagement that could transform their entire operational framework. The conversation had been confidential, bound by preliminary non-disclosure agreements, but the scope of what she was proposing was exactly the kind of high-level strategic work that Robert dismissed as computer games. The timing was almost surreal. While Robert was preparing to mock my profession at Christmas dinner, his own company was desperately seeking expertise in precisely the areas I specialized in. The digital transformation initiative that Catherine was leading represented a multi-million-dollar investment in the exact technologies and methodologies that Robert considered frivolous distractions from real work. "David," I said as we sat in the darkened car outside our house, "what if I told you that Robert's company had reached out to me about a major consulting project?" He turned to look at me, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching disbelief. "What do you mean? Pacific Manufacturing contacted you directly?" "Catherine Walsh, their new CTO, called me earlier this week. She's leading a comprehensive digital transformation initiative, and she specifically requested my expertise in user experience design and system integration. The project could be worth several $100,000 to my company." David stared at me in the dim light filtering from our porch lamp, processing the implications of what I was telling him. "You mean while my father was preparing to insult your career, his own boss was trying to hire you for exactly that expertise?" "The irony isn't lost on me," I confirmed. Catherine mentioned that they're facing significant challenges with operational efficiency, employee adoption of new systems, and customer interface modernization, all areas where UX design and digital transformation strategies are essential. David leaned back against his seat, a sound escaping him that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "This is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable." He's been complaining for months about this new executive bringing in outside consultants and digital experts. And now you're telling me you might be one of those experts. I haven't accepted the project yet, I clarified. The initial conversation was just exploratory, discussing scope and potential approaches. But Catherine seemed very impressed with my background and specifically mentioned that they needed someone with experience in complex organizational change management. The conversation with Catherine had been one of the most professionally validating experiences of my career. She had clearly done extensive research on my background, referencing specific projects I had led and methodologies I had developed. Her questions had been sophisticated and strategic, demonstrating exactly the kind of executive leadership that successful digital transformation required. What she had described at Pacific Manufacturing was a classic case study in organizational resistance to necessary technological evolution, legacy systems that no longer met operational demands, manual processes that created inefficiencies and errors, communication gaps between departments that hindered collaboration and decision-making. All problems that could be addressed through thoughtful user experience design and strategic technology implementation. "Do you think you'll take the project?" David asked, though I could see him already anticipating the delicious irony of what my involvement with his father's company might represent. "I haven't decided yet," I replied honestly. "There are obviously some personal complications to consider, given your father's position at the company and his opinions about my profession. But from a purely professional standpoint, it's exactly the kind of challenging, high-impact work that I find most rewarding." David was quiet for several minutes, clearly working through the various implications and potential consequences of my involvement with Pacific Manufacturing. The project would put me in direct contact with Robert's professional environment, potentially in a position where his dismissive attitudes about digital expertise would be directly contradicted by his company's desperate need for exactly those capabilities. "You know what I think you should do?" David said finally, his voice carrying a note of determined satisfaction. "I think you should take the project, not because of what happened tonight, and not to prove anything to my father specifically, but because it sounds like meaningful work that could make a real difference to a company that needs your expertise." He turned in his seat to face me directly, his expression serious but supportive. "And if my father happens to learn something about the value of digital transformation in the process, well, that would just be an added benefit." The next morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of winter sunshine that made Portland's December weather seem almost pleasant. I woke early, my mind already working through the various considerations involved in Catherine Walsh's consulting proposal. The professional opportunity was undeniably attractive, but the personal dimensions added layers of complexity that required careful thought. David had left for his Saturday morning run, a routine that gave him time to process stress and clear his mind. I made coffee and settled at our kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up the preliminary project documentation that Catherine had sent over earlier in the week. The scope was impressive and challenging. Pacific Manufacturing needed to modernize their entire customer interface system, streamline internal communication protocols, and implement digital workflow management across multiple departments. The kind of comprehensive organizational transformation that required not just technical expertise, but deep understanding of change management and user adoption strategies. Reading through the detailed requirements, I could see why Catherine had specifically sought out my background. The project demanded someone who could navigate the intersection of technology and human behavior, someone who understood how to introduce digital solutions in environments where traditional approaches had been entrenched for decades. My phone rang, interrupting my review of the project materials. Catherine Walsh's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a familiar surge of professional excitement at the prospect of discussing complex strategic challenges with someone who clearly understood their significance. "Maya, good morning," Catherine's voice was warm but businesslike. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from earlier this week and see if you've had a chance to consider the Pacific Manufacturing engagement." "Good morning, Catherine." I've been reviewing the project documentation you sent over. The scope is fascinating, and definitely the kind of work that interests me professionally. Excellent, she replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I have to be honest with you, Maya. After researching your background and speaking with several industry contacts, you're my first choice for this engagement. Your experience with complex organizational change management is exactly what we need. The validation was gratifying, especially coming less than 12 hours after Robert's dismissive comments about my profession. Catherine Walsh was clearly someone who understood the strategic value of user experience expertise and respected the complexity of what digital transformation actually involved. I do have one potential concern, I said, deciding that transparency was the best approach to managing the personal complications. I should mention that my father-in-law works at Pacific Manufacturing, Robert Chen, in operations management. I want to make sure there wouldn't be any conflicts of interest or awkward dynamics. Catherine paused for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking through the implications. Robert Chen, she repeated. Yes, I know Robert. He's been with the company for many years and has significant experience in traditional manufacturing operations. Her tone was diplomatic, but I detected a subtle note that suggested she had her own opinions about Robert's approach to workplace modernization. The fact that she knew him well enough to have formed an assessment wasn't particularly surprising, given her role in leading organizational change efforts. Would his relationship to you present any complications from your perspective? Catherine asked. Because from the company's standpoint, we're focused entirely on professional qualifications and project fit. Personal relationships among employees' family members aren't uncommon in manufacturing environments. I don't think it would be a problem professionally, I replied. Though I should probably mention that Robert has some skeptical opinions about digital transformation initiatives in general. He might not be the most enthusiastic supporter of the project. Catherine laughed, a sound that suggested she had encountered similar resistance before. Maya, if I let skeptical opinions about digital transformation stop me from implementing necessary changes, I'd never accomplish anything. Part of my job is helping people understand why these initiatives matter and how they benefit both the company and individual employees. Her confidence was reassuring, and I found myself increasingly interested in the opportunity to work with someone who clearly understood both the technical and human elements of organizational change. The fact that she wasn't intimidated by potential resistance suggested that she had the executive authority and strategic vision necessary to drive meaningful transformation. Can I ask what specifically drew you to my background for this project? I inquired, genuinely curious about her selection process. Several factors, Catherine replied promptly. Your experience with user adoption strategies in traditional industries, your track record with complex system integrations, and your reputation for managing stakeholder resistance during digital transitions. I spoke with executives at 3 companies where you've led similar projects, and they all emphasized your ability to get buy-in from skeptical employees. The reference checks she had conducted were clearly thorough, which spoke well of her approach to vendor selection and risk management. The fact that former clients had specifically mentioned my ability to handle resistance was particularly relevant, given the challenges she was likely facing at Pacific Manufacturing. There's one more factor, Catherine continued, her voice taking on a slightly different tone. I've heard that you have a particular talent for helping people understand how digital solutions actually improve their work, rather than just changing it. That's exactly what we need right now. The comment suggested that she had encountered significant pushback from employees who viewed digital transformation as a threat rather than an opportunity. Robert's complaints about new systems and procedures were probably representative of broader organizational resistance that would need to be addressed strategically. I'm definitely interested in moving forward, I told her, making the decision as I spoke. The project aligns perfectly with my professional interests, and working with Pacific Manufacturing would give me experience in a new industry sector. Wonderful, Catherine replied, and I could hear genuine enthusiasm in her voice. I'd like to schedule a more detailed planning session next week. Can you come in on Wednesday morning? I'll give you a comprehensive tour of our operations and introduce you to the key stakeholders you'd be working with. Wednesday morning works perfectly, I confirmed, already making mental notes about preparation and initial research I wanted to complete before the meeting. After we concluded the call, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of professional excitement and personal anticipation. The project Catherine had described was exactly the kind of challenging, high-impact work that made my career fulfilling. The fact that it would take place at Robert's company, where his dismissive attitudes about digital expertise would be directly contradicted by organizational reality, was an irony too perfect to ignore. David returned from his run as I was finishing my second cup of coffee, his cheeks flushed from the cold air and his mood visibly improved by the physical exercise. He could immediately tell from my expression that something significant had happened while he was gone. "Catherine Walsh called," I announced without preamble. "I'm taking the Pacific Manufacturing Project." David's face lit up with a combination of professional pride and personal satisfaction. "That's fantastic news, Maya. When do you start?" "I have a planning meeting with her on Wednesday morning. She's going to give me a comprehensive tour of the operations and introduce me to the key stakeholders I'll be working with." "Including my father?" David asked, though his tone suggested he was looking forward to that particular interaction. Presumably, though Catherine didn't mention him specifically. I got the impression that she's already familiar with his opinions about digital transformation initiatives. David grinned, shaking his head in apparent amazement at how the situation was developing. "This is going to be interesting. Very, very interesting." As the weekend progressed, I found myself thinking more and more about the upcoming project and its potential implications. The professional opportunity was substantial, but the personal dimensions added layers of meaning that extended far beyond typical consulting engagements. Robert's dismissive comments at Christmas dinner had revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what digital transformation actually involved and why it was essential for companies like Pacific Manufacturing. But rather than engaging in futile arguments about the value of my profession, I was now in a position to demonstrate that value through concrete results and measurable improvements. The irony was delicious, but more importantly, the opportunity was genuine. Catherine Walsh clearly understood what needed to be accomplished and had the executive authority to implement necessary changes. Working with her team would allow me to apply my expertise in exactly the kind of challenging environment where it could make the most significant impact. Sunday evening, as David and I prepared for the upcoming work week, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but immediately recognizable in its implications. "Maya, this is Catherine Walsh. I forgot to mention during our call that I'll be scheduling an all-hands meeting next week to introduce our new digital transformation consultant to the entire operations team. Looking forward to working with you." I showed the message to David, who read it with a slowly spreading grin that suggested he was imagining his father's reaction to learning that his daughter-in-law would be leading the digital transformation initiative he had been complaining about for months. "This is going to be absolutely perfect," David said with obvious satisfaction. "Dad is going to learn exactly how wrong he was about your career, and he's going to learn it in the most direct way possible." The anticipation was building, but I found myself focusing more on the professional challenge than on personal vindication. Pacific Manufacturing needed exactly the kind of expertise I could provide, and Catherine Walsh had created an opportunity for me to demonstrate the real value of user experience design in a traditional industry environment. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new conversations, and new opportunities to show that digital transformation wasn't about playing with computers, but about creating strategic solutions that improved how people worked, how companies operated, and how organizations adapted to changing market demands. Robert Chen was about to discover that his daughter-in-law's hobby was actually his company's strategic priority, and that the woman he had dismissed as someone who played with computers was exactly the professional his bosses had been looking for. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter clarity that made everything seem sharper and more defined. I had spent the earlier part of the week researching Pacific Manufacturing Corp extensively, diving deep into their company history, market position, and recent financial reports. What I discovered painted a picture of a solid but struggling organization caught between traditional approaches and evolving industry demands. The company had been founded in 1987 by Robert's original boss, a visionary entrepreneur who had built the business from a small machine shop into a regional manufacturing powerhouse. Over the decades, they had developed a reputation for quality, products, and reliable service. But recent market pressures had begun to expose vulnerabilities in their operational efficiency and customer engagement strategies. Reading through industry analyses and competitor assessments, I could see exactly why Catherine Walsh had been brought in as Chief Technology Officer. Pacific Manufacturing was facing the same digital disruption that had transformed countless other traditional industries, but their response had been slower and less strategic than many of their competitors. The drive to Pacific Manufacturing's headquarters took me through an industrial district that perfectly captured the company's position between old and new. Established manufacturing facilities with decades of history stood alongside newer technology, centers, and innovation hubs, creating a landscape that reflected the broader economic transformation happening across the region. Pacific Manufacturing's main building was a substantial structure that had clearly been expanded multiple times over the years. The original section displayed the solid, utilitarian architecture of late 20th century industrial design, while newer additions showed more modern aesthetic sensibilities and energy-efficient features. I parked in the visitor section of the parking lot, noting the mix of vehicles that ranged from practical pickup trucks to newer sedans and SUVs. The employee parking area suggested a workforce that spanned multiple generations and economic backgrounds, exactly the kind of diverse organizational population that made digital transformation both challenging and essential. The reception area had been recently updated with contemporary furniture and digital displays, showcasing company achievements and current projects. The integration of traditional manufacturing imagery with modern design elements suggested that Catherine's influence was already being felt throughout the organization, even in seemingly minor aesthetic choices. Maya Rodriguez Chen for Catherine Walsh, I announced to the receptionist, a friendly woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely excited to be facilitating what was clearly an important meeting. "Ms. Walsh is expecting you," she replied with a warm smile. "She asked me to let her know the moment you arrived. She's been looking forward to this meeting all week." Within minutes, Catherine Walsh appeared in the reception area, and I immediately understood why she had been selected to lead Pacific Manufacturing's transformation initiative. She carried herself with the kind of confident professionalism that suggested extensive experience in complex organizational environments, but without the intimidating corporate formality that sometimes accompanied executive leadership. "Maya, it's wonderful to meet you in person," Catherine said, extending her hand with a firm grip that conveyed both warmth and business acumen. "I've been eager to show you our operations and discuss how your expertise can help us navigate the challenges we're facing." Catherine appeared to be in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with analytical precision. Her outfit struck the perfect balance between executive authority and approachable professionalism, suggesting someone who understood how to command respect while remaining accessible to employees at all levels. As we walked through the facility, Catherine provided running commentary on the various departments and operational processes, but more importantly, she pointed out specific areas where digital transformation could create meaningful improvements. Her analysis was sophisticated and strategic, demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership vision that successful organizational change required. "This is our main production floor," Catherine explained as we entered a vast space filled with industrial equipment and workers focused on various manufacturing tasks. We produce components for automotive, aerospace, and industrial equipment markets, but our current systems make it difficult to optimize scheduling and resource allocation across different product lines. The production floor was impressive in its scale and complexity, but I could immediately see the operational challenges Catherine was describing. Manual tracking systems, paper-based communication protocols, and disconnected departmental processes that created inefficiencies and communication gaps throughout the workflow. Workers noticed our presence but continued their tasks with professional focus. Many of them nodded respectfully to Catherine as we passed, suggesting that she had already established positive relationships with frontline employees despite being relatively new to the organization. Our biggest challenge is integration, Catherine continued as we moved to an observation area overlooking the production floor. Each department has developed its own systems and procedures over the years, which worked fine when the company was smaller, but now creates barriers to efficiency and coordination. I could see exactly what she meant. The production floor operated with the kind of segmented functionality that was common in organizations that had grown organically over time, but which created significant obstacles to optimization and strategics. Coordination. What kind of resistance have you encountered to modernization efforts? I asked, genuinely curious about the human dynamics she was navigating. Catherine smiled ruefully, suggesting that she had plenty of experience with employee skepticism about technological change, the usual concerns about job security, learning new systems, and whether digital solutions will actually improve their work experience or just create additional complexity. Her assessment was diplomatic, but realistic. Managing organizational. Resistance to change was one of the most challenging aspects of digital transformation, requiring careful attention to both technical implementation and human psychology. I have to be honest, Maya, Catherine continued as we moved toward the administrative areas of the facility. Some of our more experienced employees are particularly skeptical about bringing in outside technology consultants. They've seen promises of improvement before that didn't materialize, and they're protective of processes that have worked for them over many years. The comment was clearly a reference to Robert and others like him, employees who had built their careers around established methodologies and who viewed technological change as potentially threatening to their professional identity and job security. We entered a conference room that had obviously been recently renovated with modern audio-visual equipment and contemporary furniture. The space was designed to facilitate collaborative planning sessions and strategic discussions, representing exactly the kind of environment where effective digital transformation planning needed to occur. Catherine gestured for me to take a seat at the polished conference table and opened a laptop to display detailed project documentation. The materials she had prepared were comprehensive and professional, demonstrating the kind of thorough preparation that successful consulting engagements required. Let me walk you through the specific challenges we're hoping to address, Catherine said, pulling up a series of slides that outlined current operational inefficiencies and strategic goals. The first priority is customer interface modernization. Our current systems make it difficult for clients to track orders, request modifications, or communicate effectively with our teams. The customer interface problems she described were classic examples of organizations that had grown successfully, using traditional approaches but now needed to adapt to changing market expectations. Modern B2B customers expected the same kind of digital convenience and transparency that they experienced in consumer markets. The second major area is internal communication and workflow management, Catherine continued, advancing to slides that showed complex organizational charts and departmental interaction patterns. Right now, coordinating projects across departments requires multiple manual handoffs and paper-based tracking systems that create delays and potential errors. I could see immediately how user experience design principles could address these challenges. Digital workflow systems that provided real-time visibility into project status, automated communication protocols that kept all stakeholders informed, and intuitive interfaces that made complex coordination tasks more manageable for employees at all levels. The third area is data analytics and performance optimization, Catherine explained, showing charts that illustrated current reporting capabilities and desired improvements. We have lots of data about our operations, but limited ability to analyze. patterns, identify bottlenecks, or make strategic decisions based on comprehensive information. The data analytics challenges she described were perfect applications for digital transformation strategies that I had implemented successfully in previous engagements. Modern analytics platforms could transform raw operational data into actionable insights that enabled both tactical improvements and strategic planning. This is exactly the kind of comprehensive project that interests me professionally, I told Catherine, reviewing the detailed requirements she had outlined. The scope is substantial but focused, and the potential for measurable improvement is significant. Catherine nodded with obvious satisfaction. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The executive team is committed to this initiative, and we have the budget and authority to implement necessary changes. What we need is someone with your expertise to guide the strategic approach and ensure successful adoption across all levels of the organization. The conversation continued for another hour as we discussed specific implementation strategies, timeline considerations, and stakeholder management approaches. Catherine's questions were sophisticated and demonstrated genuine understanding of the complexities involved in organizational transformation. I'd like to schedule a presentation to the executive team next week, Catherine said as our meeting began to wind down. They'll want to hear directly from you about your approach to digital transformation and how you plan to address the specific challenges we've identified. That sounds perfect, I replied, already making mental notes about presentation, content, and strategic messaging. Will the operations management team be included in that presentation? Catherine paused for a moment, her expression suggesting that she was considering various political and practical implications of including operations managers in the initial presentation. Some of them, yes. I want to make sure we have buy-in from key departmental leaders before we begin implementation. Her diplomatic response suggested that she was aware of potential resistance from certain operations managers, though she didn't mention Robert specifically. But given her earlier comments about skeptical employees, I suspected that he was probably among those she was considering most carefully. Before we conclude today, Catherine said, I'd like to give you a tour of the operations management area. I think it would be valuable for you to see how current systems are actually being used by the people who would ultimately be adopting any new solutions we implement. The operations management area was located on the second floor of the facility, with offices that overlooked the production floor and provided managers with visual oversight of manufacturing activities. The space had clearly been designed in an earlier era, with wood-paneled walls and traditional office furniture that contrasted sharply with the modern conference room where we had been meeting. Catherine led me through a series of workstations, where operations managers were engaged in various tasks involving scheduling, coordination, and problem-solving. The work appeared to be largely paper-based, with multiple filing systems and manual tracking procedures that created exactly the kind of inefficiencies that digital transformation was designed to address. As we moved through the operations area, I could see several managers looking up from their work to observe our progress. Some nodded politely to Catherine, while others seemed more reserved, perhaps uncertain about what our presence in their workspace might signify for their future responsibilities. This is where most of our production coordination happens, Catherine explained, gesturing toward a large whiteboard covered with handwritten schedules and status updates. It's an effective system for visual management, but it doesn't provide the kind of real-time data sharing and remote access that would improve our overall efficiency. I could see immediately how digital workflow systems could enhance, rather than replace, the visual management approach that these managers had developed. Modern project management platforms could provide the same visual overview, while adding capabilities for real-time updates, automated notifications, and comprehensive reporting. Maya? I'd like you to meet Robert Chen, Catherine said suddenly, and I felt my stomach drop as I realized we were approaching a familiar figure hunched over a desk covered with papers and forms. Robert looked up from his work, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to complete shock as he recognized me standing beside his new boss. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out as he processed the impossible situation of seeing his daughter-in-law in his workplace. Introduced by his CTO as someone whose expertise was apparently valued enough to warrant a personal facility tour. Robert, this is Maya Rodriguez Chen, our new digital transformation consultant, Catherine continued, apparently unaware of the personal connection between us. Maya has extensive experience in user experience design and organizational change management. She'll be working with us on the operational efficiency project I mentioned during the staff meeting. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Robert's face cycled through several expressions, from shock to confusion, to something that might have been embarrassment, as he realized that the woman whose career he had mocked at Christmas dinner was now being introduced as his company's solution to problems he had insisted didn't need solving. I maintained my professional composure, extending my hand toward Robert with a polite smile. "Hello, Robert. I'm looking forward to working with the operations team on this project." Robert's handshake was automatic and weak, his eyes darting between Catherine and me as if he was trying to determine whether this was some kind of elaborate joke or nightmare. His usual confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by obvious discomfort and uncertainty. "Robert has been with Pacific Manufacturing for over 20 years, Catherine explained to me, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the air. He has extensive experience with our current systems and processes, so his insights will be valuable as we plan the transition to more modern approaches." The irony was so thick it was almost tangible. Robert, who had dismissed my profession as playing with computers, was now being positioned as someone whose cooperation would be essential to the success of exactly the kind of digital transformation initiative he had been complaining about for months. "I'm sure Robert's experience will be invaluable," I replied diplomatically, maintaining eye contact with my father-in-law as he struggled to process the situation. "Understanding current workflows is essential to designing improvements that actually work for the people who use them." Robert finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Maya, I didn't realize you were involved in this project." Catherine looked between us with growing curiosity, apparently sensing undercurrents she hadn't been aware of previously. "Do you two know each other?" "Maya is my daughter-in-law," Robert admitted, his voice gaining strength but still carrying obvious discomfort. We had dinner together just a few days ago." Catherine's eyebrows raised slightly as she processed this information, but her professional demeanor remained intact. "What a small world," she said, with a smile that suggested she found the coincidence interesting rather than problematic. "That should make collaboration even easier, since you already have an established relationship." The comment was perfectly reasonable from Catherine's perspective, but Robert and I both understood the complexity of the situation that she couldn't possibly have anticipated. The established relationship she was referring to had been severely damaged by his dismissive comments about my profession, and now that same profession was being positioned as essential to his company's success. "Robert, I have a few questions about current inventory tracking procedures," Catherine continued, apparently deciding to take advantage of the opportunity to gather information from one of her key operations managers. "Maya, would you mind if we spent a few minutes discussing some of the specific challenges Robert encounters in his daily work?" "Of course," I replied, recognizing that Catherine was providing me with an opportunity to understand operational realities directly from someone who worked with them every day. Understanding frontline experiences is crucial to designing effective solutions. Robert looked like he wanted to escape, but Catherine's direct request made it impossible for him to avoid the conversation. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the cognitive dissonance of having to discuss operational challenges with someone whose expertise he had recently dismissed as trivial. "One of our biggest issues is coordinating between different production lines," Robert began hesitantly, his voice gradually gaining confidence as he focused on technical rather than personal considerations. "When we have schedule changes or priority shifts, it takes time to communicate those changes to all the affected departments. The problem he described was exactly the kind of workflow inefficiency that digital transformation was designed to address. But I could see that he was beginning to recognize the contradiction between his earlier dismissal of my profession and his current acknowledgement of problems that required technological solutions. "How do you currently handle those communications?" I asked, genuinely interested in understanding the existing processes before proposing improvements. "Mostly phone calls and emails," Robert replied, warming to the technical discussion despite his obvious discomfort with the broader situation. "Sometimes we use the whiteboard system Catherine showed you, but that only works if everyone comes up to check it regularly." The manual communication challenges he described were classic examples of operational inefficiencies that could be dramatically improved through digital workflow systems. Real-time notifications, automated status updates, and centralized dashboards that provided comprehensive visibility into project status and priority changes. "Have you ever considered digital solutions for coordination challenges like these?" I asked, carefully keeping my tone professional and consultative rather than challenging. Robert paused, clearly caught between his instinctive resistance to digital approaches and his growing recognition that his company's leadership was actively seeking exactly those solutions. I've been skeptical about whether computer systems could actually improve processes that have worked for us over many years." Catherine nodded understandingly, apparently interpreting Robert's skepticism as the kind of reasonable caution that thoughtful managers should exercise when considering operational changes. "That's exactly why we're bringing in someone with Maya's expertise," she explained. "We need solutions that actually improve rather than complicate existing workflows." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Robert gradually becoming more engaged as he discussed specific operational challenges, and Catherine took notes on problems that needed to be addressed in the digital transformation plan. Despite his personal discomfort with the situation, his professional knowledge and experience were genuinely valuable. As we prepared to leave the operations area, Catherine thanked Robert for his time and insights, emphasizing that his cooperation would be essential to the project's success. The comment was clearly intended to be encouraging, but I could see that Robert was still struggling with the implications of what he had learned. "Maya," Catherine said as we walked back toward the reception area, "I think this initial visit has been extremely productive. You've seen our operations firsthand, met some of the key stakeholders, and gotten a sense of the challenges we're facing." "I completely agree," I replied, genuinely satisfied with the comprehensive overview she had provided. "The scope of the project is clear, and I'm confident that we can develop solutions that address the specific issues you've identified." Catherine smiled with obvious satisfaction. "Excellent. Let's schedule that executive presentation for next Friday morning. I'll send you the attendee list and presentation requirements later today." As I drove home from Pacific Manufacturing, I found myself reflecting on the morning's events and their implications for both professional and personal relationships. The project Catherine had described was exactly the kind of challenging, meaningful work that made my career fulfilling, but the personal dynamics with Robert added layers of complexity that would require careful navigation. The look on Robert's face when Catherine introduced me as their digital transformation consultant had been worth every moment of discomfort from Christmas dinner. The complete reversal of our roles, from dismissed daughter-in-law to valued professional expert, represented a vindication that was both personally satisfying and professionally meaningful. But more importantly, the project itself represented an opportunity to demonstrate the real value of user experience design and digital transformation in a traditional industry environment. Pacific Manufacturing needed exactly the kind of expertise I could provide, and Catherine Walsh had created an opportunity for me to apply my skills in ways that would create measurable improvements for the company and its employees. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, and David's name appeared on the screen. His timing was perfect, as I was eager to share the morning's developments with someone who would appreciate both the professional significance and personal irony of what had transpired. "How did the meeting go?" David asked immediately, his voice carrying anticipation and curiosity. It went perfectly, I replied, unable to suppress the satisfaction in my voice. The project is exactly what I hoped it would be. Catherine Walsh's. Impressive and professional, and I had a very interesting conversation with your father. You saw my dad? David's voice sharpened with interest. How did that go? Let's just say he seemed surprised to learn that his daughter-in-law was his company's new digital transformation consultant. I replied with a smile that David could probably hear through the phone. The silence that followed was brief but loaded, with implications. Oh my God, David said finally, his voice mixing amazement with something that sounded like gleeful anticipation. He had to find out that way? In front of his boss? Catherine introduced me as their consultant and asked him to discuss operational challenges with me. It was quite an educational conversation for everyone involved. David's laughter was immediate and genuine. This is absolutely perfect, Maya. Absolutely perfect. After what he said at Christmas dinner, he deserved to learn exactly how wrong he was in the most professional way possible. The conversation continued as I recounted the details of the morning's meetings, Catherine's impressive leadership, and the scope of the digital transformation project that would soon begin. But beneath the professional satisfaction and personal vindication, I found myself looking forward to the real work ahead. The opportunity to create meaningful improvements in an organization that needed exactly the expertise I could provide. Robert Chen was about to discover that his daughter-in-law's supposed computer games were actually strategic solutions that his company was investing hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement. And he was going to learn it one carefully managed project milestone at a time. The following Friday morning arrived with the weight of anticipation that accompanies moments when months of preparation converge into a single defining presentation. I had spent the week developing comprehensive materials that would demonstrate not just the technical feasibility of Pacific Manufacturing's digital transformation, but the strategic necessity of embracing technological solutions in an increasingly competitive marketplace. The executive conference room at Pacific Manufacturing had been transformed for the occasion, with a large display screen, professional audio equipment, and seating arrangements that suggested Catherine Walsh understood the importance of creating an environment conducive to serious strategic discussion. The morning sunlight streaming through tall windows illuminated a space that perfectly balanced corporate professionalism with collaborative functionality. I arrived 30 minutes early, a habit that had served me well throughout my career in ensuring that technical setup proceeded smoothly and that I had time to mentally prepare for presentations that could determine the trajectory of major organizational initiatives. The materials I had prepared were comprehensive but accessible, designed to communicate complex technological concepts to executives whose primary expertise lay in traditional manufacturing operations. Catherine was already in the conference room when I arrived, reviewing agenda items and making final adjustments to the presentation setup. Her attention to detail and obvious investment in the success of the meeting reinforced my positive impression of her leadership approach and strategic vision. Maya, good morning, Catherine said with a warm smile that conveyed both professional confidence and genuine enthusiasm for the day's proceedings. I've been looking forward to this presentation all week. The executive team is eager to hear your recommendations for our digital transformation initiative. Good morning, Catherine. I'm excited to share what I've developed and to hear the team's questions and concerns. I've tried to balance technical depth with practical implementation considerations. Perfect, Catherine replied, reviewing the attendee list one final time. We'll have our CEO, CFO, VP of Operations, and 3 department heads in attendance. Robert, Chen will also be joining us as the Senior Operations Manager, most directly involved in the workflow changes we're proposing. The mention of Robert's attendance sent a small jolt of anticipation through me, though I maintained my professional composure. Having him present during my presentation to the executive team would provide another opportunity to demonstrate the value of expertise he had dismissed so casually at Christmas dinner. The conference room began filling with executives who carried themselves with the confident bearing of successful business leaders, but whose expressions suggested genuine curiosity. about the digital transformation initiative their CTO was championing. These were practical people accustomed to making decisions based on measurable outcomes and clear value propositions. James Morrison, the CEO, was a man in his early 60s whose handshake conveyed both strength and assessment. His questions, during our brief introduction, were sharp and focused, suggesting someone who understood the strategic importance of technological adaptation but wanted concrete evidence of potential returns on investment. Susan Chen, the CFO and no relation to Robert despite the shared surname, possessed the analytical precision that her role demanded. Her initial questions focused on budget implications and timeline considerations, establishing immediately that financial feasibility would be a crucial factor in any implementation decisions. Michael Torres, the VP of Operations, appeared to be someone who bridged traditional manufacturing expertise with awareness of technological trends. His handshake was firm, and his demeanor suggested someone who had been thinking seriously about operational modernization, but wanted to ensure that any changes would actually improve rather than complicate existing workflows. Robert entered the conference room last, his usual confidence noticeably diminished by the circumstances that had placed him in a meeting where his daughter-in-law would be presenting strategic recommendations to his company's senior leadership. He took a seat toward the back of the room, his posture suggesting someone who would prefer to be anywhere else. "Good morning, everyone," Catherine began, calling the meeting to order with the kind of executive presence that immediately focused attention and established the seriousness of the proceedings. "Thank you for making time for this important discussion about Pacific Manufacturing's digital transformation initiative." She outlined the agenda efficiently, providing context for the challenges the company was facing and the strategic importance of technological modernization in maintaining competitive advantage. Her presentation was crisp and compelling, establishing the foundation for the more detailed recommendations I would be providing. "I'm pleased to introduce Maya Rodriguez-Chen, our digital transformation consultant," Catherine continued, gesturing toward me with obvious confidence in what I was about to present. Maya brings extensive experience in user experience design and organizational change management, with a track record of successful implementations in companies similar to ours. The introduction was professional and supportive, but I noticed Robert, shifting uncomfortably in his seat as Catherine highlighted my qualifications and expertise. The cognitive dissonance between his Christmas dinner comments and this executive endorsement was clearly creating internal conflict that he was struggling to resolve. "Thank you, Catherine," I began, standing and moving to the front of the room, where the presentation display was visible to all attendees. "I've spent the past week analyzing Pacific Manufacturing's current operations, and I'm excited to share recommendations that can significantly improve efficiency, communication, and strategic capability." The first slide displayed a comprehensive overview of the challenges I had identified during my facility tour and stakeholder interviews. Manual coordination processes, disconnected departmental systems, limited real-time visibility into production status, and customer interface inefficiencies that created barriers to optimal performance. These challenges aren't unique to Pacific Manufacturing, I explained, making eye contact with each executive as I spoke. They represent common pain points that successful manufacturing companies across multiple industries have addressed through strategic technology implementation. The presentation continued with detailed analysis of current workflows, identification of specific bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and quantified projections of potential improvements that could be achieved through targeted digital transformation initiatives. Every recommendation was supported by data, industry benchmarks, and case studies from similar companies that had successfully implemented comparable solutions. James Morrison leaned forward with obvious interest as I outlined projected efficiency, gains, and cost reduction opportunities. The numbers I was presenting represented potential annual savings that significantly exceeded the investment required for implementation, creating a compelling business case that transcended any skepticism about technological change. Susan Chen asked detailed questions about implementation timelines and budget requirements, her analytical approach ensuring that financial considerations were thoroughly addressed. The conversation was exactly the kind of rigorous evaluation that successful technology projects required, focusing on measurable outcomes and practical implementation considerations. Michael Torres inquired about employee training requirements and change management strategies, demonstrating awareness that technological solutions succeeded or failed based on user adoption and organizational support. His questions allowed me to highlight my experience with managing complex transitions and ensuring that digital tools enhanced rather than complicated existing work processes. Throughout the presentation, I was acutely aware of Robert's presence in the room, though he remained silent during the discussion. His expression had evolved from initial discomfort to something that might have been grudging recognition as the strategic value of the recommendations became increasingly clear. The customer interface modernization component drew particular interest from the executive team, as they recognized the competitive advantage that improved client communication and service delivery could provide. The B2B marketplace was increasingly demanding the kind of digital convenience and transparency that consumer markets had normalized, and companies that failed to adapt risked losing business to more technologically sophisticated competitors. One of the most significant opportunities involves integrating real-time production data with customer-facing interfaces, I explained, displaying mock-ups of proposed system improvements. This would allow clients to track order status, request, modifications, and communicate directly with production teams, while providing Pacific Manufacturing with valuable data about customer preferences and behavior patterns. James Morrison nodded approvingly as he considered the competitive implications of enhanced customer service capabilities. Our clients have been asking for better visibility into their orders, he observed. If we can provide that while our competitors are still relying on phone calls and emails, that becomes a significant differentiator. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with each executive asking probing questions that demonstrated genuine engagement with the strategic possibilities I was outlining. The discussion was professional and substantive, focusing on implementation details, success metrics, and organizational considerations that would determine the project's ultimate effectiveness. As the formal presentation concluded, Catherine asked if there were any final questions or concerns that needed to be addressed before the executive team made their decision about moving forward with the digital transformation initiative. Robert finally spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of reluctance and curiosity that suggested he was struggling with conflicting impulses about participating in the discussion. "I have a question about employee training and adaptation," he said, his tone carefully professional despite the personal undercurrents of the situation. The question was reasonable and important, focusing on how existing employees would learn new systems and whether the technological changes would create additional stress or complexity in their daily work. It was exactly the kind of concern that experienced operations managers should be asking, and it provided an opportunity for me to address implementation considerations that would directly affect frontline workers. "That's an excellent question, Robert," I replied, maintaining professional courtesy while internally appreciating the irony of him asking for my expertise on workplace technology adaptation. Change management is a crucial component of any digital transformation, and I've developed specific strategies for ensuring that new systems actually improve rather than complicate employees' work experience. I outlined detailed training programs, phased implementation approaches, and ongoing support structures that would help employees transition smoothly to new technologies. The discussion allowed me to demonstrate not just technical knowledge, but understanding of human psychology and organizational dynamics that successful technology adoption required. Robert listened intently to my response, his expression suggesting that he was beginning to recognize the sophistication and strategic thinking that effective digital transformation demanded. The dismissive attitude he had displayed at Christmas dinner was gradually giving way to something that might have been grudging professional respect. The meeting concluded with Catherine thanking everyone for their participation and announcing that the executive team would be making their final decision about the project within the next few days. The tone of the discussion had been overwhelmingly positive, with clear enthusiasm for the potential improvements that strategic technology implementation could provide. As executives began filing out of the conference room, several of them stopped to thank me personally for the comprehensive presentation and to express their appreciation for the thorough analysis I had provided. The professional validation was gratifying, particularly given the personal dynamics that had led to my involvement with Pacific Manufacturing. Robert lingered in the conference room after the other executives had departed, his expression suggesting that he wanted to say something, but was uncertain about how to proceed. The awkwardness between us was palpable, created by the complete reversal of our roles from Christmas dinner to this professional setting. "Maya," he said finally, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard from him before. That was an impressive presentation. Very thorough and professional. "Thank you, Robert," I replied diplomatically, recognizing that he was attempting to acknowledge the expertise he had previously dismissed. "I appreciate your questions about employee training. Those concerns are important and legitimate." The brief exchange was stilted and uncomfortable, but it represented a significant shift from his earlier dismissive attitude. Robert was clearly struggling to reconcile his preconceptions about digital work with the evidence of strategic thinking and professional competence he had just witnessed. Catherine approached as Robert prepared to leave, her expression suggesting satisfaction with how the presentation had been received by the executive team. "Maya, that was exactly what we needed," she said with obvious enthusiasm. "The combination of technical depth and practical implementation focus was perfect for our leadership team." "I'm glad it was helpful," I replied, genuinely pleased with how the presentation had gone. The questions were excellent and demonstrated real engagement with the strategic possibilities. As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave the conference room, Catherine made a comment that would prove to be prophetic. "I have a feeling this project is going to exceed everyone's expectations," she said with a smile that suggested she was anticipating positive developments beyond just the technical implementation. The following Monday, Catherine called with the news I had been hoping to receive. The executive team had unanimously approved the digital transformation initiative, with a budget and timeline that would allow for comprehensive implementation of all the recommendations I had presented. "Maya, I'm thrilled to tell you that Pacific Manufacturing wants to move forward with the full scope of work you outlined," Catherine said, her voice carrying genuine excitement about the project's potential. "James Morrison was particularly impressed with your analysis and strategic approach." The professional validation was deeply satisfying, representing recognition of expertise and strategic thinking that transcended any personal considerations or family dynamics. Pacific Manufacturing's leadership had evaluated my recommendations on their merits and concluded that the value proposition was compelling enough to justify a significant financial investment. "There's one aspect of the project that I want to discuss with you personally," Catherine continued, her tone becoming more serious. "Given your family connection to Robert Chen, I want to make sure you're comfortable with the level of collaboration this project will require with the operations team." The question was reasonable and demonstrated Catherine's awareness of potential complications that could arise from mixing professional and personal relationships. But from my perspective, the situation was straightforward. Pacific Manufacturing needed expertise that I could provide, and Robert would need to adapt to working with someone whose professional capabilities he had underestimated. "I don't anticipate any problems, Catherine," I assured her. "Robert is a professional with decades of experience, and I'm confident we can work together effectively on implementation strategies that benefit the company." Catherine seemed satisfied with my response, and we spent the next hour discussing project timelines, resource allocation, and communication protocols that would ensure successful implementation. The conversation was detailed and strategic, focusing on practical considerations that would determine whether the digital transformation achieved its intended objectives. The irony of the situation continued to deepen as we discussed Robert's role in the implementation process. As senior operations manager, he would be directly involved in testing new systems, training other employees, and providing feedback about workflow improvements. The man who had dismissed my profession as playing with computers would now be relying on my expertise to modernize processes that were essential to his own job performance. Over the following weeks, as project planning moved into implementation phase, I found myself working closely with Pacific Manufacturing's operations team on a daily basis. The collaboration required regular meetings, system testing sessions, and training workshops that brought me into frequent contact with Robert and his colleagues. The dynamic between Robert and me evolved gradually but noticeably as the project progressed. His initial discomfort gave way to reluctant participation, which slowly transformed into something approaching professional respect, as he experienced firsthand how thoughtfully designed digital solutions could actually improve rather than complicate his work processes. The moment that crystallized this transformation occurred during a training session focused on the new workflow management system I had designed specifically for operations coordination. Robert was testing the interface while I provided guidance on features and functionality that would replace the manual tracking systems he had been using for years. "This is actually going to make scheduling much easier," Robert admitted, his voice carrying surprise at discovering that the technology was intuitive and helpful rather than complicated and disruptive. "The real-time updates and automated notifications will eliminate a lot of the coordination problems we've been dealing with." The comment represented a fundamental shift in his understanding of what digital transformation actually involved. Instead of arbitrary change imposed by people who didn't understand manufacturing operations, he was experiencing technology that had been designed specifically to address the challenges he encountered in his daily work. "Maya, I have to ask you something," Robert said during a break in the training session, his tone carrying a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been embarrassment. "How long have you been working on projects like this?" "About 8 years professionally," I replied, recognizing that he was beginning to understand the depth of experience and expertise that his Christmas dinner comments had dismissed so casually. "I've led digital transformation initiatives for manufacturing, companies, healthcare systems, financial services firms, and technology startups." Robert nodded slowly, processing the implications of what I was telling him. The scope of experience I was describing clearly contradicted his earlier assumptions about the substance and significance of my professional work. "I think I may have misunderstood what you do for a living," Robert said finally, the admission clearly difficult for him to make. "What you've created here, this system, it's actually going to make our jobs easier and more effective." The acknowledgement was simple but profound, representing a complete reversal of his earlier dismissive attitude. Robert was recognizing that digital transformation wasn't about replacing human expertise with computers, but about creating tools that amplified existing capabilities and eliminated unnecessary barriers to productivity. As the weeks passed and the digital transformation project moved through various implementation milestones, the relationship between Robert and me continued to evolve. Professional respect gradually replaced personal tension as he experienced directly how strategic technology implementation could enhance rather than threaten traditional manufacturing expertise. The other operations managers and frontline employees also began to recognize the value of the changes we were implementing. Initial skepticism gave way to enthusiasm as they discovered that the new systems actually simplified many of their daily tasks while providing capabilities they had never had access to before. Catherine Walsh observed these changes with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that successful digital transformation required exactly the kind of employee buy-in and organizational support that was beginning to emerge throughout Pacific Manufacturing. Her strategic vision was being vindicated by measurable improvements in efficiency, communication, and customer satisfaction. The project that had begun as an opportunity for professional vindication was evolving into something more significant, a demonstration of how thoughtfully implemented technology could bridge the gap between traditional manufacturing expertise and modern operational demands. Robert Chen was discovering that his daughter-in-law's supposed computer games were actually sophisticated strategic solutions that made his own work more effective and meaningful. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been established for a new kind of professional relationship built on mutual respect rather than dismissive assumptions. The woman Robert had mocked at Christmas dinner was now someone whose expertise he actively sought out when facing operational challenges that required technological solutions. Sometimes the most powerful vindication comes not from dramatic confrontations, but from quiet demonstrations of competence that gradually shift perspectives and transform relationships. The digital transformation at Pacific Manufacturing was succeeding not just as a technology project, but as a lesson in the importance of recognizing and respecting expertise wherever it might be found. 6 months after the digital transformation project launched at Pacific Manufacturing, I received a phone call that would complete the most satisfying professional vindication of my career. Catherine Walsh's voice carried excitement and genuine appreciation as she shared news that exceeded even my most optimistic projections for the project's success. "Maya, I have incredible news to share with you," Catherine began, her enthusiasm immediately evident. "The results from our digital transformation initiative have exceeded every benchmark we established. Production efficiency is up 23%. Customer satisfaction scores have improved by 18 points, and we've reduced operational costs by nearly 15%. The numbers she cited represented extraordinary success by any measure. But more importantly, they demonstrated the real-world impact that thoughtful technology implementation could achieve in traditional manufacturing environments." Pacific Manufacturing had become a case study in successful organizational transformation, with measurable improvements that validated every recommendation I had made during that crucial executive presentation. "But there's something even more significant I want to tell you," Catherine continued, her tone becoming more personal. "The way this project has transformed not just our operations, but our entire organizational culture has been remarkable to witness. Employees who were initially skeptical about digital solutions are now our strongest advocates for continued innovation." The cultural transformation she described was often more valuable than the technical improvements themselves. When organizations successfully navigated technological change, they developed confidence and capabilities that enabled continued adaptation and growth. Pacific Manufacturing had evolved from a company resistant to change into one that embraced strategic innovation as essential to competitive success. "Robert Chen has been particularly vocal about the project's impact," Catherine added, with a tone that suggested she was aware of the personal dynamics that made this observation especially meaningful. "He's become one of our most effective advocates for digital solutions, regularly sharing with other department managers how the new systems have improved his team's performance." The transformation in Robert's attitude represented the most personally satisfying aspect of the project's success. The man who had dismissed my career as playing with computers had become an enthusiastic supporter of exactly the kind of strategic technology implementation he had once mocked. His professional evolution demonstrated how direct experience with well-designed solutions could overcome even deeply entrenched skepticism. Catherine's call concluded with an invitation that would provide the perfect capstone to my involvement with Pacific Manufacturing. The company was hosting an industry conference focused on digital transformation in traditional manufacturing, and they wanted me to deliver the keynote presentation about the strategies and principles that had made their project so successful. The conference was scheduled for the following month, with attendees including manufacturing executives from across the Pacific Northwest who were considering similar technological initiatives for their own organizations. The opportunity to share Pacific Manufacturing's success story with industry leaders represented exactly the kind of professional recognition that established expertise and built reputation in specialized consulting markets. 3 weeks later, I stood before an audience of nearly 200 manufacturing professionals in Pacific Manufacturing's newly renovated conference center. The venue itself represented the company's commitment to modernization, with state-of-the-art presentation technology and contemporary design elements that reflected their evolved organizational identity. Catherine's introduction was generous and comprehensive, highlighting not just the technical success of our collaboration, but the strategic thinking and change management expertise that had enabled sustainable transformation. Her words carried the weight of measurable results and genuine appreciation for partnership that had exceeded expectations. As I began my presentation, I could see Robert Chen sitting in the third row, his expression attentive and supportive in a way that would have been unimaginable during that Christmas dinner 6 months earlier. Beside him sat several other Pacific manufacturing employees who had been directly involved in implementing the digital solutions I had designed for their specific operational challenges. The presentation I delivered focused on the principles and practices that enabled successful digital transformation in traditional industries. Rather than emphasizing technical specifications or software features, I concentrated on the human elements that determined whether technological change created value or disruption for organizations and their employees. Understanding that technology serves people, not the other way around, was the central theme of my presentation. Every digital solution I had implemented at Pacific Manufacturing had been designed with deep consideration for how actual workers would interact with new systems, what their daily challenges were, and how technological tools could enhance rather than complicate their professional capabilities. The audience's engagement was evident through their questions and comments, with several executives asking for specific guidance about implementing similar initiatives in their own organizations. The discussion that followed my formal presentation extended for nearly an hour, with manufacturing leaders sharing their own experiences and challenges related to technological adaptation. During the networking reception that followed the conference, I was approached by James Morrison, Pacific Manufacturing's CEO, who wanted to thank me personally for the transformation my work had enabled within his organization. His comments were particularly meaningful because they came from someone who had evaluated the project's success through multiple metrics over an extended period. "Maya, what you've accomplished here goes far beyond the technical improvements," James said, his tone carrying genuine appreciation and respect. "You've helped us develop organizational capabilities that will serve us well for years to come. The confidence our employees now have in embracing change and innovation is invaluable." The conversation continued as James described how the digital transformation project had influenced Pacific Manufacturing's strategic planning and competitive positioning. The company was now actively seeking opportunities to leverage technology for market advantage, a fundamental shift from their previous approach of implementing changes only when absolutely necessary. As the reception was winding down, Robert approached me with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal humility. The transformation in his demeanor from that Christmas dinner was complete and remarkable, representing genuine recognition of expertise he had previously dismissed without understanding. "Maya, I wanted to thank you for your patience with me during this project," Robert said, his voice carrying sincerity that made his words particularly meaningful. "I realize now that I completely misunderstood what you do professionally, and I'm grateful that you didn't let my ignorance prevent you from helping our company succeed." The acknowledgement was gracious and heartfelt, representing exactly the kind of personal growth that successful professional relationships could foster. Robert had evolved from someone who dismissed digital expertise to someone who actively championed its value, and his transformation had been genuine rather than superficial. "I also wanted to apologize for what I said at Christmas dinner," Robert continued, his tone becoming more personal. "My comments were inappropriate and unfair, and they reflected my own insecurities rather than any legitimate assessment of your capabilities or achievements." The apology was unexpected but deeply appreciated, representing closure on a painful episode that had ultimately led to extraordinary professional opportunities. Robert's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and express genuine regret demonstrated the kind of character development that meaningful experiences could inspire. "Thank you for saying that, Robert," I replied with genuine warmth. "I appreciate your willingness to be open to new perspectives and I'm glad we've been able to work together successfully on something that benefits everyone involved. The conversation that followed was comfortable and genuine, focusing on the professional satisfaction that comes from successful collaboration and mutual respect. Robert shared insights about how the digital transformation had affected his daily work experience, while I described the personal fulfillment that comes from seeing strategic recommendations translate into measurable organizational improvements. As David and I drove home from the conference, he reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred not just in Pacific Manufacturing's operations, but in family relationships that had been strained by misunderstanding and dismissive attitudes. The journey from Christmas dinner confrontation to professional collaboration represented exactly the kind of personal growth that challenging experiences could inspire. "You know what I find most remarkable about all this?" David said as we navigated through Portland's evening traffic. "It wasn't just that you proved your professional worth to my father. It's that you did it in a way that actually helped him and his company succeed. That's a level of grace and professionalism that I really admire." His observation captured something important about how authentic vindication differs from simple revenge. Rather than seeking to diminish Robert or prove him wrong in a petty way, I had focused on demonstrating value through meaningful contribution. The satisfaction that came from this approach was deeper and more lasting than any temporary triumph could have provided. The consulting engagement with Pacific Manufacturing had officially concluded, but the relationships and reputation I had developed through the project continued to generate opportunities. Word of the successful digital transformation spread throughout the regional manufacturing community, leading to inquiries from other companies facing similar challenges. Catherine Walsh remained a valued professional contact and advocate, regularly referring potential clients who could benefit from my expertise in user experience design and organizational change management. Her leadership during the Pacific Manufacturing project had been exemplary, and our collaboration had established a foundation for future partnership opportunities. The personal relationship with Robert had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship, built on mutual professional respect and appreciation for each other's expertise. Family gatherings were no longer tense affairs marked by dismissive comments about career choices, but opportunities for interesting conversations about industry trends and technological innovation. 6 months after the conference, I received an email from Robert that perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred in his understanding and appreciation of digital expertise. He had been promoted to Director of Operations at Pacific Manufacturing, a recognition of his successful leadership during the digital transformation initiative. "Maya, I wanted you to be among the first to know about my promotion," Robert wrote. "I'm convinced that the success of our digital transformation project played a significant role in this recognition, and I want to thank you again for your expertise and patience throughout that process. Your work didn't just improve our operations, it helped advance my career in ways I never anticipated." The email continued with an invitation to join his family for a celebration dinner, where he wanted to publicly acknowledge the role my professional expertise had played in Pacific Manufacturing's success and his personal advancement. The invitation represented a complete reversal from that Christmas dinner where he had mocked my career, to a celebration where he wanted to honor its significance. The story that had begun with dismissive laughter and condescending comments about playing with computers had evolved into recognition, respect, and genuine appreciation for expertise that created measurable value. Sometimes the most satisfying professional vindication comes not from dramatic confrontations, but from patient demonstration of competence that gradually transforms relationships and opens minds to new possibilities. Robert Chen had learned that his daughter-in-law's supposed hobby was actually a sophisticated profession that could determine the success or failure of major organizational initiatives. The woman he had dismissed as someone who played with computers had become someone whose expertise he actively sought and publicly celebrated. The transformation was complete, and the vindication was perfect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.